like to call to order this special meeting of the Board of Selectmen on April 24th. It's 6:15. There's got a single item on the agenda. It's to just have an additional discussion prior to the preliminary budget meeting on the budget. When we last met and we made our recommendations to the budget, it was somewhat apparent to me that there was a degree of concern and/or consternation as related to what was there, what we presented. So I wanted to take some time. We have the opportunity, and I thought we'd take advantage of that opportunity to see if there's anything else that we felt was important we do. What I did do is I with Tony, took a look at the budget to identify any areas where there might be some. One of the points of contention that we did have when we were discussing the budget previously was the planner in the Board of Selectmen budget, so that's one of the items I mentioned. Tony and I looked at some other items that we might be able to modify in some way, shape, or form in order to try to see what we can do about reducing the budget. And with this being the type of year that it is, particularly with the revaluation and with regard to the environment that we're in right now, in terms of particularly as relates to municipalities, state and federal grants and funds and things of that nature, there's a lot that can happen, and it's a year that we should, if we can, try to take as close a look as we can. So I think this second bite at the apple, if you will, was just something that we should have at least a discussion on. Our budget goes to the public for a vote on May 19th, so we have some time that we can recommend to our Board of Finance and for their consideration. So that's what this is about. The second item that I did want to discuss, and this is just a topic that's become more and more prevalent as we get closer and closer to this time frame. I'm having discussions with other town leaders as relates to phasing where revaluation is concerned, and ways and opportunities to mitigate the impacts of revaluation on the public, for obviously particularly those people in our case whose taxes have gone up rather significantly, to understand what can be done and what the implications are to us, to the town, the rest of the town, and to the rest of the residents and to the town from that perspective. That's something that you'll hear most of at our next meeting, which will be on the 14th, which will be just before the budget meeting, but it will be something that we will continue to look at, and I'll continue to communicate. Because of the fact that we don't meet again until the 14th, I'll communicate just to let folks know if there's anything that's of significance that you should know. So, but let's start with the budget. We spent a lot of time looking at this, so it's something that I felt everyone was familiar enough with the information to come up with some ideas and any thoughts that they might have. We can start with the information that I provided, or we can each kind of discuss what we want to do. So to make it easy and to get moving, we'll start with the documentation that I provided you. And the first item on there is the town planner. From my perspective, my position hasn't changed, because I've had the benefit of working with the town planner and understanding the value that they've brought to EDC, the value that they brought to TPZ, and the value that they've brought to myself and Tony in terms of, and also to the Beecher Planning Committee and some other groups as relates to their function and their expertise and providing us reports and things of that nature. So, and as I had said before, I was remiss in not sharing exactly the value as it was happening. I've had our consultant put together all the reports that they provided over the course of the last 10 to 12, close to 10 months at this point in time. And I've also asked them to come in to meet with the Board of Selectmen at our next meeting specifically, and I'll also provide you a summary in terms of some of what they've done, so that everyone here understands what that is. And my opinion on it hasn't changed. The function, I think, was invaluable to us in terms of that expertise that they bring, and having the resource that you can go to and ask for information data that will help you in terms of making our decisions. My understanding is that I recognize that there are some folks who are concerned related to the other people who are associated with the firm that we're using. But my concern relates more to the function and the need for that function. We used to have it, we don't anymore, and I think we suffer because of it. Particularly going into the year to come, because we're having a significant focus on the business district. And we need zoning changes in the business district, from my perspective. And I say that as a result of talking to the business owners. There was a turnover of a business on Amity Road that there was consideration when I spoke with the broker about the business in terms of trying to see if there's something that the town can help, that the town can do in terms of businesses that come in. We identified that we didn't have the zoning that would, for example, enable a mixed-use type of availability, although just not too far down, there was that capability. Not exactly sure, so it's something that we need to take up with zoning, and that type of activity is something that the planner is instrumental in getting and helping us do, and making sure that what we do, we understand the whys of what it is and the implications and the impact of what we would like it to be. So I think we're utilizing different resources like Connecticut Main Street and others who are expert at helping communities like ours identify what we are from a business district standpoint and helping us to define exactly what we can be. Cooper Robertson has also indicated in terms of anything that they're doing as far as that project is concerned, it would probably require some zoning changes. And again, these are the resources that would help us in terms of doing that. So again, this is all, from my perspective, just to lay out what I think, the reason I felt strongly that we should keep it in here. And I'll turn it over to you now.
Mika, can I ask a question
Please.
about the overall numbers? We have here, if we looked at all of this and the amounts, it totals $173,000. If we took that out of the budget for the next fiscal year, how much of a reduction are we going to see? So,
if I remember correctly, it goes down about 0.2.
okay.
So it goes down from like 4.95, Tony, if I remember,
It
to,
goes from 32.68, the mill rate, you mean?
no. Well, the mill rate, we did calculate.
32.68 to 32.57.
And
It's not
each one
nothing.
mil is,
And the budget goes from, to 4.66%.
Right. So it's less than actually 2.
because I'm looking at the benefit that we would gain from having these things on here, and I see that there's some other things that I'm sure you'll explain about,
Yes.
is it, fire department, is that needed? Is that something that we can move to another line item, retirement, you'll go through those, but for the amount that it's gonna reduce the overall town budget, I'm wondering if the return on investment of having that is gonna put us in a better position. So that's just what I'm
Yeah.
looking to weigh at the moment.
And one of the reasons for us doing this, Maria, was for specifically in this case to identify exactly that. For example, we looked at line item part-time personnel at the library, and it's $220 some odd thousand dollars, and it was like, okay, if we looked at that the way we did at Rec and some other places, and we said we're going to have to reduce that by 10%. We are talking about people at this point in time. I think I've made that point many, many times. At this point in time with our budget, where the town is concerned, we're looking at people in programs when we start to cut dollars. So in this particular instance, we went to the director at our library and said, listen, we need another $23,000. We'll let you tell us how we're going to get that. And basically said we can shut down Tuesday night. So we are at a point where that's the implication. So this reflects closing that at a particular day.
So this 22.5 means
Yeah.
Tuesday night, the library will be closed.
Correct. And for example, the medical and the retirement is taking a full-time employee that we had budgeted for away from the Parks Department and instead utilizing the two resources we have at the transfer station by closing the transfer station on a Wednesday or Thursday.
And he would also have to hire some seasonal help as well.
And was there already money in that seasonal?
No, so you would have to transfer the money. So what we did was we put the salary into the full-time account and took it out of the seasonal. So in his operating budget, there was no impact really because it's about the same. But in benefits, you reduce the benefits. That's why the benefits are reduced.
And in the case of the fire department, we looked at the monies that had been spent in those particular categories over the course of the last couple of years to identify if there was any latitude there. And we felt like this is a judgment call on our part, saying, hey, listen, we gotta tighten our belts. This is what it takes. So as to, how critical those are, it really depends on the needs, what happens from that perspective in terms of that particular line item.
Can I ask a little bit more about fire, because I know we had a lot of presentation of there are costs that are going up on them that they don't have any control over, and yet there are requirements. So I wonder if I wanted to see if the technical and gear, we're talking about potentially 37,000.
Right.
Can we pre-buy that with existing this year funds?
Some of it you can.
I was hoping that's why it was here, because the entire 37,000 could be pre-bought and then eliminated
Some you probably
without
could, but what
losing.
you're essentially doing is there's a risk that, in fact, there may be a bigger need than what's budgeted, and that then he may have to, request additional funds throughout the year.
Right.
But
But-
particularly, it's like sand, salt, materials. Depends on the
Yeah, I
year.
have no idea.
If we
Yeah.
have
Well, and also thinking that costs for everything may be going up.
right,
And we can't predict that right now. So
correct.
I guess my question about, it would be great if there were money in this year's budget that we could say to various departments, and I would put the school in that department as well. I think I heard that there's some sort of surplus right now for Beecher, but if they have an ability to pre-purchase anything, to the extent that they're able to do it, we should encourage it, not only because those things don't have to be purchased next year and therefore don't have to be part of our budget, but also because the costs are what they are today, and we don't know what they're going to be. So the more we could do that, the better, but I don't think I'm hearing yet that we're still able to do those things as we get closer to May, right?
Yes,
If we find
that's
out.
what we did, if you remember in our last budget, at the
Yeah.
end of the year, we had
things.
surplus dollars and we had contingency dollars, and that's exactly what we use them for.
Right.
Is to mitigate some of the expenses
Correct.
for the next, for
Do
the
we-
following
But that's
year.
not what we're seeing tonight.
No.
This
We're not
is, this
ready
is
yet.
just
Okay.
proposed budget.
Okay.
Do we know if our delegates on the Amity School Board are able to make any impact on what I view as their improper budgeting of capital costs on our dime, now that we're paying over $1.5 million, or about $1.5 million more than the other surrounding towns for this year's budget, and as we know, the Amity School Board has been historically using those funds to pay capital costs that have a 20-year lifespan, they should be budgeted through bonding. By budgeting them on their current budget, we end up paying, by virtue of our census this year, for should be a 20-year cost. And that obviously, the two things that have driven our budget, as you pointed out in our letter, are Beecher and Amity, more than anything else.
Amity in particular.
Amity in particular. And we have almost zero control over that. To some extent,
If
our only control would be if we somehow reduced our census, which we can't do. So
The increase in Amity was about 1.361, if I remember correctly. The more than half of that, almost $900,000, $888,000, if I remember correctly, on that was specifically as a result of our enrollment having gone up by 44 pupils. And Orange went up by 9, and I believe, or went down. Long story short, the percentages in terms of the disbursement of the funds, in terms of the allotments, was such that our percentage of the whole went up 2+%. And that percentage equated to almost close, between $850,000 and $900,000.
I mean,
So,
our increase is 11 times what Orange is. That makes no sense. And
but again, that's specifically because of that reason, not because we did look at what you're
kids.
saying, and what you're
Yep.
saying is correct.
Yeah.
I'm not, I don't feel like we have an opportunity to do something about that this year, but I do feel next year going into it, we need to have this discussion with the Board of Education and let them know that, let them know along the lines of what you're saying. But what I'm saying in terms of the increase this year, it has most to do with the increased enrollment that we have in the new percentage of the total budget that we now are responsible for as a result of that increase. And so,
Can we get is it possible for us to have a report from our delegates to that
Yes.
board
yes,
and ask them, how hard are you pushing on this? Because I've only been to a couple of the meetings of the board, and it just seems to me that we are being clearly taken advantage of in this situation to some extent.
to some extent, David, but I think we need to recognize that our enrollment increased, so we have a higher percentage. With our percentage going up, that means that Orange and Bethany's percentage actually decreased.
No doubt, but the recent change in the methodology that Amity adopted to hold a large,
Correct. The 2% you're talking about.
they're continuing to keep that money to pay off long-term projects, capital projects, which is not the way it should work, and it's clearly to our detriment, in particular, because we have the highest census. So
Because our enrollment increased. Correct.
that's part of this, and the people that you're talking to are also towns that reassessed this year.
Yes,
I mean, not everybody obviously had to reassess this year,
yes.
but
In terms of the revaluation now you're
and to
talking
be
about.
clear, I'm glad you had those discussions, but to be clear, this is not a Woodbridge problem. This is a common problem in our state
With revaluation.
with revaluation, largely because as statewide, there are market issues that are driving up the cost of the lower income, of the low-end housing relative to all the other housing.
The lack of that is what's driving it. Yes, I
Yeah,
agree.
it's supply and demand, right? It
Correct.
works.
Right. Right.
The demand is higher than the supply, and we've known that, but it's not something that we did. We're in the same situation as the vast majority of other towns because that market has affected not just us, but everybody.
Right. And in a lot of the other towns that have a greater, there's a disparity between the residential and the commercial that's also impacted them. So their problems are not, or their issue is not necessarily exactly the same as ours, but we share the same issue. And at this point in time, what the town leaders are doing is hoping that we can start with the meeting with the governor to see if there's something that can be done, because it's severely impacting on a finite group of residents when this type of thing happens. And this year in particular, it's very specific to the homes that are more affordable than the larger homes that exist here. So in a lot of those cases, one of the reasons for the big concern is that a lot of those homes that's where a lot of our seniors reside, and people have been here for a long time. But they are the smaller homes.
Yep.
And it's the lack thereof that's obviously causing this amongst,
They're going
like
up
you
in
said.
price because of demand.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Understood.
In all our communities.
So can I ask a question? I know you mentioned the possibility, and we'll talk about it at a later date, of sort of smoothing in the increase that is the result of the reevaluation. So I think Orange is a year ahead of us, and they did choose to smooth it in over 2 years, I think. It was 2. But that has impacts. Are there also ways that we could do that for part of the grand list and not all of the grand list? Because I guess the downside of smoothing it in over 2 years is the revenue is not coming in those 2 years. So that's,
Your mill rate
it's going to be
stays
very
up.
hard to apply to this budget, right? But when we're talking about the people who are kind of hit hardest, the people with the lower value homes and their revaluation went up much higher due to market rates, could we target that kind of relief to a subset of homeowners, or do we have to do it across the board? Do we have latitude there?
We're trying to challenge what our interpretation is on that, Sheila. I can't answer that question. That's definitely, we're engaging our legal resources
that's
and
the
some
little
other
nuance.
resources.
Okay.
Yes, in terms of how, because when you read the statute, it more or less indicates that it's across the board. You know, it's your entire grant list. And that doesn't necessarily help us in the way we
It
want it to.
relieves some people who need relief less than others.
Correct. And it also impacts those folks who would otherwise have been not impacted, you know, that whose taxes may have gone down or you know, stayed flat. So that's, there's,
So more to
when
come
we looked at
on
this
that. initially,
we talked to some of particularly the finance people in some of these towns, and it was, and our people, our assessor and some others, and it was only in a desperation that people seemed to do it. It was
Right.
categorically
Yeah.
indicated that was not a good way to go.
Well, when we very first started discussing it, and we mentioned it, Tony kind of gave us some feedback to
Right.
that effect as
Right.
well.
Right,
That
so
it's not really something
we're looking at
that you
other
do
options.
lightly.
Right, and then we're looking to see if there's other options available that would enable us to do that. We are starting to run out of time on that, but it's something that we do have a little bit of time to try to get. So that is being handled as a priority at this point in time.
So for tonight, Mika, it looks like what is here is partly some things that, in theory, when we get to the end of the year, we could fund possibly out of this year's contingency. Then we have a decrease in programming and the personnel associated with that. And then we have and then we have the planner, which, you know, in my view, the question there is the return on investment for the actual tax savings that it's gonna provide.
I also think, in addition to the decrease in programming specific to the library, we would have other costs in our budget associated with that. Utility costs, reductions, others. I don't know if that would reduce other salary. I don't know if that would reduce other salaries.
That would be the salary.
That would just be the,
reduction.
okay. I think it's sad to think of having a reduction in programs, especially to our beloved library. But these are very challenging times for most of America, and Woodbridge residents are not secluded from the harsh realities of what we're living through. And I think this calls for some change, and I'm appreciative for this opportunity to do everything we can to alleviate our residents. And I think making all of these reductions is a good step in the right direction and is indicative of the type of really hard decision-making we have to show up to do. My stance on the planner, which is the bulk of the funds in question at this time, has not changed. I do not feel that is a good use of our money at this time. It hasn't been depicted to me as a good use. Mika, I understand your opening remarks and that you feel differently. I have no reason to unfortunately to agree with that, because it hasn't been depicted to me, and I think we're kind of at capacity with our consultant line items this budget season.
Most other towns, keep in mind that line item is a salary.
Yeah. And I'm grateful ours, you know, I mean, well, I shouldn't say I'm grateful, because I understand at large the benefit of having a town planner. I definitely feel uncomfortable about the firm through which ours is procured. And I would, you know, so that's a part of it for me, a part of my concern. But I think we can, get by without it.
What it represents from my perspective, to keep my side of the argument going, what it represents, one of the things that I feel is absolutely critical from our perspective is growth. And I've said that to the point where people are sick of saying it. Everything,
Can you
the only thing
specify
here. growth in
residential
terms of-
growth or?
No, commercial growth, any
Yeah.
growth, any growth. In other words, let me put it a different way. Our main source of revenue is our taxpayer. If we don't identify different opportunities and lines of income, revenue, anything that increases means our taxpayers dig deeper in their pockets, period. So there's a couple ways you can mitigate that. One of the ways is through cutting expenses. And that becomes very challenging and very difficult because at some point in time, you can't get blood from a stone, as they say. Not to say that we're at that point. That's not what I'm trying to say. All I'm saying is that you can only go so far with that. The means by which virtually any entity continues to be able to afford, particularly with inflation being what it is these days, to afford to continue to provide services that are necessary or that the town is looking for, is to increase revenue. The planner is the one piece here that represents the potential for growth, represents the potential to increase revenues by improving things at the business, in our business district. And that's a focus. That's got to be a focus at this point in time because that's one of our few opportunities.
Can I just add,
please.
Mika, that's where you and I do agree, because I think the business district and economic development is priority,
Right.
and or is up there on our priority list. We have presented to us during budget season the EDC requesting funds to do a pilot project to support that business district, which, to my understanding, did not get funded in our budget. I believe that request was for $40,000. I mean, there are more affordable ways utilizing the boards and commission, the appointed members that we are trusting to do this work. I understand they're not paid and there's a different level of expertise, but they're coming with creative solutions at a lower dollar amount that could achieve or get us one step closer to achieving that goal. I don't know if you have numbers of how the planner is promoting growth, what impact we're realizing from it. That would be really helpful if that existed. We talk about making data-driven decisions. I think that would be data I would need to see personally to approve this budget, because it's unclear to me that translation of planning and growth, though I understand conceptually what you're saying.
Well, from a conceptual standpoint, it's what I'll say is all we need to do is look at the development on Bradley Road from Toll Brothers' perspective, identify what the revenues generated from those from a permit standpoint, from a tax standpoint, from a fee standpoint, the revenues generated from that versus the expense that we've incurred associated with that, to understand that there is a significant benefit to that developmental growth.
At least right now, yes.
Correct.
Well,
Correct.
time will tell. We don't have a long-term data set there, right? So I
think one of the things that you're certainly right on that particular score. The interesting thing is how radical our problem is going to be in terms of our budget this year, even with all that income that came in during
Correct.
this year.
Correct.
And I continue to believe that since we're at 90% housing, residential housing for our grand list, that those projects, which are the only thing that this administration has been pursuing for have been successfully pursuing for probably 10 years, is simply adding to the problem rather than a clear solution. If residential housing were going to help mitigate our taxes, we couldn't possibly have a problem. We probably have
David.
almost the highest level, the highest percentage of our grand list being residential of any town in the entire state. I mean, maybe not some of the extraordinarily small ones that have no businesses of any sort. But 95%, going to 96% does not seem like a solution. And this year, we do have all that Toll Brothers money that came in, as you accurately point out. We're here talking about a budget that's a problem for us and about a new assessment that has shifted our tax burden down toward the median and lower income levels.
But David, if you remove the Toll Brothers revenue, now we're talking about a significant problem, more problems. So yes, we're still talking about the fact that we need more because we need more. We need additional.
Well, maybe the same conversation was happening when our town was only 50% residential, and getting to 95% did not apparently help our problem. We've been looking at a very steep climb in the taxes that are being paid. To Maria's point, this set represents tens or hundreds of dollars in residents' tax bill, where we're going to see shifts of literally thousands of dollars, where some taxpayers, and it's not even across the board in the way it is in a non-assessment year, as you have pointed out accurately. Some taxpayers are going to see 30% increases in their taxes because of the assessment, not because of this
The budget.
and $50 or $100 to those people, or $1,000, $50 to hundreds of dollars won't make a significant difference. So this dollar amount isn't going to change the budget really. But as I look at your town planner, there are two aspects of it. One is the money, but the other aspect is the planners and that company's association with what was an extremely Woodbridge-centric, very critical, I guess it was a monograph or an actual presentation that was given. And I understand large companies have lots of different divisions, but I find it we, the board, as you pointed out, have not had anything to do with the town planner. Mm-hmm. But we do know that his company has at least one strong piece of evidence of being very negative toward our town. And having said some specific things that I simply don't believe are accurate. So I'm wondering why a company that I think is perpetuating an inaccurate portrayal.
It's not perpetuating. He testified. It's not being perpetuated because certainly since I've been here and working with this company, I didn't even.
Well, we don't know that.
Right.
I mean, we as a board don't know that. What we do know is what's on the public, what's out there.
That's how you know. Well, that's how you know what you're saying. So that's how you would know whether he was perpetuating it because it would be out in the public.
So can I ask a question?
Sure.
Just for what we're doing here tonight. So we're reviewing the budget, and I think we discussed this when we voted on the budget. What is in that line item is not tied to the contract itself. So if a change in the contract is going to be contemplated, it's not really in that line item at all. But I guess the question before us is, do we need that amount of money to do planning in whatever capacity we would direct planning? And I see Mika's point that there are many things on the horizon, some of which might be legal advice about zoning changes and that sort of thing. So in my mind, that dollar amount is going to be needed. I think we retain the ability to direct that later on. That's not an issue tonight. It's not an issue until we actually have the budget approved through our normal process. So I guess what I'd like to do is maybe move that conversation to a different night, because we're stuck right now on that. And I think that the overall idea in front of us tonight is trying to determine if there are ways that we can help smooth the impact of the reevaluation and the budget increase, because there's two things operating at once, on the taxpayers. We're going to go over to the preliminary budget hearing. We're going to hear ideas from them. I'm interested to hear if anyone's got new insights that we haven't thought of ourselves. But then after we've gained that knowledge, if we have some further conversations about things like closing the transfer station one day, closing the library one day, those are big issues that I think we would need to talk with the public a little bit more about and take our time with. Does that make sense for tonight? If I don't know if there are other budget line items that anyone has thought of?
Are there?
My only question is, it does seem like taking advantage of part-time, which take out of the picture those long-term benefits that are associated with a full-time employee. If we're getting the same service out of that, and it's costing the town less.
It's very, specifically on the park side, in terms of taking out the full-time
Yeah.
employee, that's, the reason that we're taking it out is because if we close it, we get 2 full-time employees once a week to help with the parks work that needs to be done. So the reason we put the full-time was even included to begin with was very specifically because it was so difficult to maintain the level of service with part-timers because they're in this particular area, they're not as reliable or as available or as qualified to do the work that's necessary. So it was becoming a real challenge, and we were actually behind on some of the things we needed to do.
Right.
One full-time person would have resolved a lot of that issue. So now what we're doing is.
I think that's the crux of the question,
Yes.
really, is it, are the additional benefits worth it, right? Because if we can get it done some other way,
Yeah.
if the work is
yeah.
covered.
There might be an argument to say that the additional benefits are worth it because we keep that person employed, they learn each year, we don't have to retrain them, and they're more
I hear you,
reliable.
but, we do
So
have
it's
to
a-
make budget decisions.
It's a
at the point.
balancing thing, yeah.
In this case, with the parks in particular, we've tried with the part-time.
Yeah,
And I don't know, Tony, for sure, you probably know better than I do, if we've reduced that workforce at all from a full-time standpoint over the years.
Parks Department?
Yes.
We have generally for Public Works,
Yeah.
reduced
The
one,
full-time.
2 positions, 3 positions.
So, and we've tried it with part-time, so that doesn't work. That hasn't worked for us. So that's why the full-time was there, and then
So
the
I'm-
next step is, so what else can we do? And that's where the transfer station idea comes in.
yeah, I
Transfer-
guess since we don't really know what the planner's doing, it's not clear. It's not something that this board has really looked at. And, so my question is, do we need a planner, do we need a manager? I mean, a manager might be the kind of person who would manage those issues and know better, because I don't have the expertise to know whether it's better to have
That line
part-time
item is
person.
significantly more than $83,000 for a town manager.
I hear you, but, and I'm wondering whether,
But you're basically saying that it's not the dollars.
well, the dollars, this cut at this point is, again, hundreds of dollars to individual taxpayers.
If that's.
Yes,
what
but
Maybe.
I don't want to be insensitive. For me, in my household, those hundreds of dollars have an impact. They do. I'm on a state salary. I'm not, a Yale affiliate or lawyer like most of our residents are. And I think we have to consider all economic scales in our. So I understand your point. It might not feel like that impactful, but I really do believe every penny counts, especially when we approach next year and we're starting at a lower base.
But we have to recognize how you address the larger issue, okay? And the larger issue is that we need revenue streams. We need to increase. And with the planner, you're taking away the one element that can help you in terms of that particular activity.
If that's proven
Well,
to me,
it
then
doesn't have to be proven from my perspective. Please just look it up in other towns. And, from my perspective, it also is evident in the fact that it is one of the more demanding positions in the state at this point in time, and it's very, very difficult to find a town planner, and there are municipalities that are actively looking for town planners.
That may be-
Because of the value of a town planner.
Yeah.
You know, it's, we lost one because the person left, not necessarily because we decided we didn't want the function, we just didn't, we did what we've been doing all along. Anytime somebody leaves, we try to see if we can get by without that person. But it's, you know, when you say you don't see the value, it's like, if there's no value, there wouldn't, that function wouldn't be as scarce as it is, and it wouldn't be as in demand as it is, and it wouldn't pay as much as it does.
Do those other towns that you reference also have a consultant for a specific, like we have how many consultants on our payroll right now, in our budget?
Well, I think most of them are grant funded.
Correct,
Partially, at least,
at least,
not fully.
at least.
Let's be transparent about that.
As was this planner for this year. It was partially grant funded. Half of we had a $40,000 grant for this.
If a planner as a line item remains, as you think, critical to success, I would hope that we, as a board, just like we were for Cooper and Robertson, could be involved in the selection process and could have frequent, regular updates and input. Because right now that's not how it's functioning, and so it's hard for me to sit in this seat and have this conversation in a meaningful way, and really make an informed vote.
I mean, I would have to agree with that. I do think, you know, going forward, whoever we have in that position, I mean, I've had interactions with them from the Beecher Board, you've had interactions with them, but I think they should report to the whole group so that we all know what value they're bringing to the community. With that said, I do also agree, there are hard decisions that are going to have to be made, but I think before hearing how we can mitigate the impact of the reevaluation and how that might help some people in town, I am not necessarily inclined to cut programming tonight headed into the preliminary budget meeting.
I understand that, and I support that approach. I think it's really valuable to get the public's input because this would obviously affect them. If we're successful in getting that input, that's an asterisk, kind of to be determined. So at some point, it really might come back to us making hard choices. And
Absolutely.
just how Mika said, we have to consider multiple towns need planners, have planners, they're in demand. A lot of towns have reduced programs and services. They don't even have a town clerk working, you know, and not to their benefit, but there are towns where the assessor isn't there that often. As a state employee, it's very challenging to talk to these municipalities and reach them. But the precedent of having reduced programs is out there and distributed pretty widely throughout our 169 municipalities. And it's not necessarily forever if we go down that route. Just during these kind of, at least in my lifetime, unprecedented, burdensome times.
Well, we're looking at talking about the part of our budget that represents 2.8%, because that's all we feel we control. But Beecher's at 5.18% of this problem that we're facing. Amity is 7.25%, and that's that gets worse when we have a sudden change in the scheme for our taxes that hit hard upon some of the seniors, where we've been talking at this board about aging in place as being a goal. And we have a human services department that's working hard, but they're stretched thin. They're on the 2.8% side of the budget. They're not on the 7% side of the budget that is just skyrocketing, and has been for 10 years, Tony? We've got our school budget, the schools that represent 2/3 of our budget are up much more than the other third.
You'll see in the presentation that I make at the hearing, that since I do a snapshot from 2017 to 2026, and over that time period, the town budget's gone up about 16%. Keep in mind that the consumer price index is about 30% during that time period. If you look at, goes up and down, but the Woodbridge Board of Education is about 35% and Amity's 41%. So you can clearly see the difference.
And there may not be much we can do about that, but when our tax situation, to your point, Andrea, people who don't have the flexibility of $100 certainly don't have the flexibility of $1,000. And yet with seniors, we're talking about a lot of people who are not working, who aren't benefiting from salary increases on an annual basis. Those people they don't have kids in our schools. They are probably in large homes. They may be getting older and thinking about moving, but they love our town. And when we hit them with this saying, hey, your house just went up 70% in value, so please pay us 30% more taxes this year, they're going to say, well, that increase in the value of my home has no value to me until I sell it. I'm going to sell, and this is the shove that pushes me to down south to go to be a permanent resident of a different state, and that house then brings in more school children, which the census is a big part of our problem with both the way that they budget and also the numbers working against us in census. So the part that we do control in some degree is not what they're spending and what they want to spend, but as long as we are hopefully able to provide the kinds of services to our seniors that make them want to stay, we don't hit them with 30% increases in their tax bills, and
David, we don't have a choice on that. That's what you're saying. We don't hit them with that's not something we're controlling.
I get
there.
it, but you say we don't control it, but it's I mean the choice is that we're gonna have a bigger problem. We could have a zero budget here, and their taxes are still going to go up 30%. We could have a minus budget here, and their taxes are still going to go up the amount that you're talking That's
about.
why I'm wondering
a little less than that.
I'm wondering why we're talking about a small amount of money on the 2% side, because it doesn't seem like that's going to make much difference to that issue.
We're only talking about what I'm suggesting. We could talk about a whole lot more if you want to talk about a whole lot more, and you want to decide that you want to.
Well, you said
some
we're
other
going
things.
to maybe talk about ways that we could mitigate it at our next board meeting. And I don't know.
That's in terms of phasing, because as I said, we've gotten a lot of different opinions on phasing. There's a lot of different directions to go on phasing, and so far there hasn't been one clear answer that would really satisfy what we're looking to do. I am looking to try to see what we can do about mitigating the impact of the revaluation. That's a revaluation problem. That's not a Board of Selectmen deciding that we're doing something that's going to.
Understood, but the impact, my concern is the impact is going to change our town, because we will have the most likely outcome,
Which is
from
the
my
reason-
perspective, because I've heard from some of the people in that part of our community who are looking at houses that are a little bit too big, maybe they're struggling a little bit to keep them up, and they would rather sell.
Two things you say, that, first of all, which is one of the reasons me and a few other town leaders are specifically trying to go to the governor to see what can be done, and to try to understand as clearly as possible what can be done. Because we don't have control over this.
Yeah.
It's frustrating as hell, because we don't have control over this, because we know what's happening, we know the people it's impacting, it's not the people we want it to impact, but we don't have control over it. So mitigating the budget by another 2 or 3%, that's the tens of dollars that we're talking about to these people. It's still going to be the 30%. That's what we have to find a way to change. And we have to understand how that impacts everyone, not because there doesn't seem to be a clear way right now that we can do it just to help those people.
Why?
You know, that's the challenge. Also, you mentioned the fact that these people will be forced to move to the south, to wherever. One of the reasons is because we don't have an option for them to move here in town. Otherwise, we might be keeping some of those tax dollars, and they might have some options to do that.
Keeping those tax dollars isn't really what what we're looking at. What we are very interested in is having long-term residents stay because they're valuable
Couldn't
to
agree
our
with you
town.
more.
But if they leave a 4-bedroom home, two-thirds of our town have no kids in school, and they're paying the taxes for all the kids who are in school. So if those people start to leave 4-bedroom homes, we're going to have a lot more kids coming in because it's been documented that we are one town where that happens. And that's one of the pressures on our lower income side, is that a lot of people want to move here for our school system. So we're kind of we're very attractive because of our appreciation of the value of education.
The challenges that exist have existed for a long time. They will exist tomorrow if we don't decide ourselves that we want to do something entirely different on it. Those are challenges that exist not only here, they exist in other places as well. Those are 2/3 of if you look at most communities, particularly communities of our size, 66% or more of their budget goes to education. That's the world. What it is in our community, we have always valued education. So we've always been willing to pay for education. My kids have been out of school for many, many years, but I'll support the budget because I want the school system. I want the next person to be able to get what my kids got. And that's what this town is about. Where it gets frustrating for me is when you're finally at a point where you can't stay in town, whether it's because of the taxes, whether it's because you can't keep your house, or whether it's because you just want to change. There's no place for them to go. That's the challenge. Those are the problems that we have to start looking at and starting to find ways to fix. We say that residential won't fix the problem. Well, you have gaps in what you can provide to your people as a basic element of the town, and we don't have that. Just being able to keep your seniors in place, being able to have your kids come back to town and find a starter home or a small or even apartment. Even an apartment so they can work in New Haven and live close, live somewhere else. Those are the problems we have to address. We have to take it at the root. Will it completely resolve our issues? Absolutely not. We have to do something, and that's why we have to focus on the business district. And again, all of this, the housing, the business district, that all gets helped by having expertise like the town planner. That's the reason I want to keep it in.
All right, so where does, no, I appreciate the passion. There's so many moving parts to all of this, and there's just not a one-size-fits-all approach to.
And we're not alone. Like I said, there's other communities who I'm working with specifically because they're going through the exact same thing we are. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was just, in light of 23 minutes from the preliminary
Yes.
budget meeting, where are we at here? What are we?
It doesn't sound as if we want to make a decision right now as far as these particular items are concerned, which is absolutely fine. I wanted to have the discussion. I wanted more than anything to understand where we are.
Yeah.
Because next year's discussion is going to be this.
Yeah.
It's going to be the library and time. It's going to be the transfer station. If we're going to have to cut expenses in order to try to find a way to get where we want to get to. That's what it's going to be. So, and also to see if you had anything that I just simply overlooked, that Tony and I just simply overlooked, that we want to really, take into consideration. So that's open. We can discuss that at our next meeting. We can offer input as we do as public in terms of to the Board of Finance. It's just, I felt it was important because I recognize the situation that so many of our residents are are up against with this revaluation, that like you said, Andrea, it's more, we have to demonstrate that we're looking at this and we're trying.
Yeah.
Is really what it boils down to. So.
Can I ask a question so a lot of what we're talking about are items that should be addressed by the next plan of conservation and development. And that's a document that might sketch out where do we think we want to go in the next 10 years? Because if that document doesn't recognize some of these challenges that we're facing, right? And talk about the wonderful services like library and education and everything, but if the plan of conservation and development doesn't provide a blueprint for how we're going to keep those things, maybe that's a way in which we can get input from people to say, we recognize what's happening. We can project out what the costs are going to be 10 years from now. We've got to have a certain amount of either growth or changes in the way that we pay for the services, and a decision about whether we want the services or not. So maybe that's a place where we can really lay that out for people, rather than just waiting for the next budget to come around. We use that planning stage to get a little deeper into what the options are, what other people might be doing, look at other POCDs.
There might be an opportunity in advance of the budget season to survey the town on, like, I don't know if that would scare people off or what, but to get a sense of what they're comfortable with. If
Well, I think the POCD process that's meant to
Indicative,
be
yeah.
where people
Inclus-
come forward and talk about it. And I know some people have told us they're waiting for the actual draft, so they can comment on the draft. They want to sort of, jumpstart right into the nuts and bolts. And I too am waiting to see the draft. So that I think that's the opportunity. Ask people to come. Maybe there's a way of asking people to submit testimony if you don't want to come. Send us something, send us correspondence, fill out a survey. But I do think the POCD process has been surveying people throughout, so.
And
Yeah.
I think to your point too, there's a fine line, and like you said, reaching out to other communities that don't have someone there, in a
Yes.
certain office all the time, but there's a line where people also have to feel for their tax dollars that their
They're
government
getting.
is working
Absolutely.
for
Doing
them,
something.
and that
Absolutely.
is responsive to them and receptive and creating a community for them. So there are hard decisions that have to be made, but there's also that line where if you cut everything and then people are still paying but we're not getting any services,
I agree.
that becomes something to look at. So that line is something we can get, I think we can get to by having further conversations with the community, because this has to work for the people as well.
My sense is we have 5 months at least that we know we're going to be together. So from my perspective, I think
Or
we
December
identify.
31st, right?
Right, 6 months, that we identify how we want to approach this, and we start approaching it very early in the process, prior to the quote-unquote budget season, and we identify
agree.
exactly how we want to go after and what we want to go after, so
And-
that we can,
Yeah, I love that idea and that path forward. And I think we could also be, as there is a demonstrated history, but we could be a little bit maybe more specific and direct with our departments. And I know, what's the term, zero based budgeting? Like, we've never done that to my knowledge. Maybe.
we've done it with the school,
Yeah, so maybe it's appropriate.
It's been a while since the school did it.
and it killed the school. I think the school.
They
But-
found $1
You're
million is what
At
they did.
least, at least to
Beecher.
some. I don't know,
No,
something
We
to
did it with Beecher,
reconsider.
It's, yes, it is.
Yeah.
And that's something that we should have discussions on, so.
Yep.
I appreciate it. I took your time, on a night
Thank
where
you.
we couldn't have started until 7:30,
I-
but I thought it was a worthwhile
I
discussion.
applaud your efforts. I think you're dealing with a lot of previous foot dragging, and maybe what we need is a time machine. So we could put
No,
that
I
in the
wish.
budget to go back and deal with this 15 years ago, and it probably should have been being
And,
dealt
and
with.
deal with you and I who sat on the previous board too.
Yeah,
We need
well,
to,
we could
like,
get rid of those
clunk us
guys.
in the head. Yeah. Wake up!
Yeah, I know that. I can say the same, so I
I think
appreciate
this
it.
was a conversation worth having.
And I will keep you posted in terms of what we find out as we progress with phasing and
Yeah.
see exactly what we can do. But right now, the indication is that it doesn't seem to provide us the type of assistance that we need for the people who we need it for,
Amen.
in such a way as it would be a viable option. That's the way it's looking right now.
Thanks for that update.
All right,
Thank you.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Oh.
Second.
second, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you.